Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Fantasy Fellow Show. I am your host, theFellowKGB. You can follow me on Twitter at theFellowKGB. And I'm just going to be wrapping up my NFC North team previews here. We're going to be looking at the Minnesota Vikings in this video. And if you're watching on YouTube, please don't forget to like the video, leave me a comment, and subscribe to the channel if you're listening to the podcast on Apple or Spotify or any other podcast platform. It'd be real cool if you left us a rating and a review. We're trying to grow this channel and the Fantasy Fellow Show and the Fantasy Fellowship in general. So anything you guys do would be greatly appreciated. And let's get into the Minnesota Vikings here. So we got head coach Mike Zimmer back for another year. New offensive coordinator Gary Kubiak. Their offensive coordinator last year was Kevin Stefanski, and we see him now as the head coach for the Cleveland Browns. So I don't think this offense will change that much. Gary Kubiak is pretty. I think he was with them as some kind of assistant last year. So the offense should pretty much stay the same. I don't expect too much variance here. So I'm looking a lot at 2019 as my projections for this upcoming season. So we're going to go ahead and start with the quarterback play and Kirk Cousins. His backups are Sean Mannion, Nate Stanley, and Jake Browning. Nate Stanley's an interesting guy. They drafted him in the 7th round here. Seventh round, 244th overall out of Iowa. He's an interesting quarterback to keep an eye on. But look at all these draft picks the Minnesota Vikings had. Holy crap. We'll get to that in a little second here. But anyways, if anything happens to Kirk Cousins, the Vikings are not in good shape. They'd have to trade for a quarterback or something if they want to be competitive. We'll see if Sean Mannion can do anything. But this quarterback room is all about Kirk Cousins. So we're going to go ahead here and take a look on the screen share of how he fared last year in terms of finish, in scoring. We see Kirk Cousins here at quarterback 16. He had 444 pass attempts, 3,603 yards, 26 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. So highly efficient. Not a lot of yards, but overall he was able to produce and landed as a quarterback too. And I think that's what I'm going to suggest that he is for this season. He's going to be no more than a super flex quarterback too. He could be streamed in a one quarterback league. He's probably not going to be drafted or owned in many of those leagues, but he does have quarterback 2 value for us. And I guess if we just look at some of his numbers real quick, he's been kind of on a downturn the last couple of years. I guess 2018 was his best year with 4,300 yards, almost 30 touchdowns, 10 interceptions. So it was a big drop down from that in terms of passing yards. But Adam Thielen was out last year, so that played a big role in things. And then, Dalvin Cook played a lot, so they ran the ball a lot. And that's pretty much the thing on Kirk Cousins is now that they have Stephon Diggs gone, I don't really know how much different his stats are going to look than what it is this year. So I like Kirk Cousins. I think it's going to be a functional offense, but we're not really relying on the quarterback here for fantasy outside of Superflex. So we'll go ahead here to running back. And today is June 10th. There was news a couple days ago that Dalvin Cook is threatening to hold out unless he gets a new fair contract. So we'll be watching that all summer and monitoring that situation. But for now, we're going to assume Dalvin Cook's going to play. He'll get his money at some point. And if he decides to sit out, we'll touch on that in another video down the road. But for now, Dalvin Cook had a career year last year. He still didn't play a full 16-game season, but he did. I think it was 14 games. So if we filter here in PPR leagues, we're going to see Dalvin Cook finished as the RB6, about 21.2 points per game. On a point per game basis, that would have been best for the number 2 running back. So we like what Dalvin Cook brings to the table here. We're going to see 250 attempts, 1,135 yards, 13 rushing touchdowns, and then through the air on 63 targets, he had 53 catches, 519 yards, and 0 touchdowns. So he was, over 300 touches, altogether. If he does come back and play a full 16-game season, he's going to be right around 300 touches as well. So he's definitely got top 5 running back upside. And as we mentioned before, he did have the second most points per game fantasy-wise from a running back standpoint in PPR league. So Dalvin Cook's as good as it gets. He's in a very run-friendly offense, and they're going to continue to rely on him there. So we'll see if he gets his money or not, but go ahead and keep targeting Dalvin Cook at some point in the first round if you want to dive into that. If you're drafting right now, I could convince myself to pivot from Dalvin Cook and look at guys like Derrick Henry or even Alvin Kamara. I think that's a fair play too. But The real big question is if Dalvin Cook does sit out, who's behind him? So we have year two, Alexander Madison. He was in Boise State a couple years ago, and this is his second year now in the league. We got Mike Boone, Amir Abdullah is back, and then Tony Brooks James. So if Cook is out or misses any time from injury, it's going to be Alexander Madison stepping into the line share, the load. And then Mike Boone might get some opportunities too. They like Amir Abdullah in some passing situations, but he's not a fantasy threat. Um, it would pretty much be Alexander Madison. If we look quick at what Madison did last year, he did finish filtered by PPR here. I think he was 50 something. He was number 61 last year. So as a rookie, he had 100 rushing attempts, 462 yards. That's 4.62 yards per carry. And one touchdown. He had 10 catches and 82 yards. So some pretty good numbers here from Alexander Madison. He didn't really get a chance to do anything too crazy in the games when Dalvin Cook missed because he himself got hurt. But we see that the Vikings weren't afraid to give him double-digit carries in some games. We see 1, 2, 3, 4 games with more than 10 carries. He had a couple games over double-digit fantasy points. And this is a good running back. If Dalvin Cook wants to sit out, I think the Vikings are going to be just totally fine running out Alexander Madison and Mike Boone. So let's take a look here at Mike Boone because I have a feeling that if Dalvin Cook does miss games, they're not just going to give Alexander Madison every touch. They're going to work in some Mike Boone. So Mike Boone, at the end of last year, is when he got his opportunity, and that's when he started to crack some of our fantasy lineups. So he had a pretty bad game against Green Bay Week 16, which was championship week. But we do see Week 15, 2 touchdowns, 56 yards, 4.3 yards per carry, and then the last game against Chicago, he blew up for 148 yards and a touchdown. So Mike Boone's got some good skills here at the running back position, and I would imagine that both guys would almost be worth rostering and almost worth starting in that situation because they're probably going to want to use both guys. So we'll see how that goes. But I don't know, I like the depth of this group here. It's a pretty good group. But yeah, Dalvin Cook, top 5 pick, top 5 running back, and he, I mean, the sky's the limit for him. He's that good of a running back, so he gets so much rushing volume and passing target opportunities. So we love that. So they got C.J. Ham here back at fullback, and then receivers here with Stephon Diggs gone. We're going to see Adam Thielen step into an elite wide receiver one status, where he's going to get funneled tons of targets. The thing is, if he can stay healthy, we should be expecting almost a career year for Adam Thielen in terms of targets. I know a couple of years ago, Adam Thielen had one of the best fantasy seasons we see with 153 targets, 113 receptions, 1,373 yards, and 9 touchdowns. I think that's kind of what we're looking at. We're looking at, and then I guess if you look at 2017 too, where he had 143 targets, 91 receptions, 1,277 yards, and 4 touchdowns. I'm thinking we're somewhere in that range in between those two. So it wouldn't surprise me if he pops off for 150 targets, about 100 catches, and almost 1,300 yards. And then the touchdowns will be the big variable that depends on how high he finishes. So I mean, Stephon Diggs is gone, man, and now they're injecting a first round pick in wide receiver Justin Jefferson, who I like a lot, but rookies are going to have a tough time adjusting to the NFL. I think, especially at the receiver position. That's already a tricky position to make a big statement or a big help in right away. So I think this is going to be a heavy Adam Thielen targeted offense. And then we do have Justin Jefferson here, who they did select with their first overall pick, number 22 from LSU. Jefferson dominated the college football world last year with Joe Burrow as his quarterback in that LSU offense. It was a pro style offense, and they used Justin Jefferson pretty much as a big slot receiver. So we'll see if Justin Jefferson gets the same role. They might decide to use him more as an outside receiver. We don't know yet. So I'll be watching him for sure a lot in the preseason to see just how he's developing and if he's having success in those games. Because he might be a guy that could be useful for some fantasy points at some point throughout the season. So we really got to keep an eye on him. He's got some upside. I love him in Dynasty as well. Because Adam Thielen's getting older, so Justin Jefferson could be the number 1 receiver here in maybe 2 years. I don't know about next year, but we could see a takeover soon here with Jefferson leading the way. So outside of those guys, we're not going to worry about any of these other guys here for fantasy, but they did sign Tajay Sharp. Olabisi Johnson's back for year 2. They drafted another receiver here, KJ Osborne. They drafted him in the 5th round, 176th overall over Miami. He'll be an interesting guy to keep an eye on in preseason. He should make the team. Chad Beebe is back. Alexander Hollins, Dylan Mitchell, who's the guy I liked last year coming in as an undrafted guy. Or maybe he was drafted last year. I don't know. He was a late round pick, maybe. Davion Davis, Courtney Davis, who I think was another pick. Did they snag another receiver here? No, he was a undrafted free agent ad, and then Dan Jacina. So a lot of guys here trying to make the team, but nothing that we need to worry about for fantasy outside of Thielen and then Jefferson, of course, in dynasty leagues. And maybe at some point this year, he could be making our lineups. I think this offense is going to, heavily run through Cook and Thielen when they're healthy, and then they're going to start to rely on these tight ends a little bit more with Stephon Diggs gone. We saw Herb Smith and Kyle Rudolph basically like match each other with targets and receptions last year. Rudolph just had more touchdowns and a little bit more yards. But I think that this is going to be an offense that we see, more 2 tight end sets, more running looks, and we're going to see Herb Smith, I think, featured a little bit more as a receiver this year. So I could see 2020 being the year Herb Smith kind of starts to overtake Kyle Rudolph. I'm a little nervous about taking both guys as far as being my tight end 1. I wouldn't recommend that, but Herb Smith has some potential as a tight end 2 or 3 in best ball leagues, and then Kyle Rudolph still has a pretty good connection with Kirk Cousins in the red zone. So both guys basically have similar value in best ball leagues where they could end up scoring 6 or 7 weeks for us throughout the year. Um, but yeah, I guess behind them, Tyler Conklin, Brandon Dillon, and then Nakia Griffin-Stewart. So I don't know. This offense it's lacking some punch without Stephon Diggs anymore, but we'll see if Justin Jefferson can pick up the slack. Um, the offensive line's going to get a little better here. They did snag another tackle in the 2nd round. We see a cornerback here. Just look at all the players they drafted here. I can't even count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 draft picks in the 2020 class. So we'll see if a lot of these guys can make the team. Overall, though, they snagged a new wide receiver. They got a good cornerback in Jeff Gladney out of TCU, and they got potentially a starting tackle here. So overall, they should be fine on offense without Stephon Diggs. We just might see a little bit more attention in the running game and in the tight ends to kind of ease the release of Stephon Diggs. But this defense might be the problem, I think, for this team this year. They did lose 3 of their top starting cornerbacks. Hence, they took a corner 31st overall and 89th overall. So that was a priority for them. And then they did snag a 3rd one down here in the 5th round. So the Vikings secondary might be a little bit vulnerable this year. The defense could be an Achilles heel, I guess. A team that wants to run the ball, but they can be easily passed on. So we'll see how that works out. I think the Vikings are going to be a fringe playoff team. They're going to pretty much be what they were last year. They're going to be a tough team to stop with Dalvin Cook. And if someone can stop Adam Thielen, I think that's going to be pretty much the keys to the game each week. Can you stop those 2 players? So I think that's going to do it, though, for the Minnesota Vikings preview. Again, we like Kirk Cousins for QB2 and Superflex, I suppose. And then Dalvin Cook, of course, Adam Thielen. These guys all have top 5, top 10 potential at their position. So we'll see how much other contributions they get from the rookie Jefferson and then the tight ends Smith Jr. and Rudolph. So that's going to do it for the Minnesota Vikings. If you haven't checked out the other NFC North videos, I highly recommend doing that. And then we have a bunch of other team previews done as well. We are currently done with the North divisions and the East division. So that's half the league. And we're going to be picking up and continuing what we're doing here in a couple days. So yeah, go ahead and check all those out. Check out some of the other stuff on thefantasyfellowship.com. And yeah, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. We'll see you in another video. Peace.